Hello and welcome to this CYP presentation on some of our AV over IP products. So we'll be covering 1 gig solutions today, and let's get into it straight away. If you're not familiar with CYP, you'll see on screen there that we do a wide range of products, mostly based around HDMI and HD-based-T distribution, but also then with our AV over IP products, we have fiber products as well now, and then also things like signal management tools, converters, scalars, audio products, even HDMI cables as well. Today we're going to be focusing on 1 gig AV over IP solutions. We'll start off with an overview. Then we'll have a case study from a popular sports bar in London, and then we'll be going into the hardware a little bit more in depth. So, as it says, the future is now. It's called AV over IP. So, what is it? The distribution of digital video and audio and control across an IP network. And we'll see seeing this become a lot more popular now due to its flexibility and scalability. So what is it doing? It's converging video, audio, power over Ethernet, control signals, and USB functionality for things like KVM support, all using a 1 gig network switch. Let's have a look at some of the key features. So flexibility and scalability. Unlike a traditional matrix, maybe a 4 input, 4 output, 8 input, 8 output, with the IP system like this, you're not limited to a set number of inputs and outputs. So with a 4x4 matrix, for example, you can't really upgrade that if the customer needs an additional input at a later date or an additional zone without getting into complications. So with an AV over IP system, it's very simple to just add additional transmitters or additional receivers and just literally build them into the system and increase that system over time. The IPCS7, that's our control unit, and that has a really intuitive drag and drop interface. So it's very, very simple to use. And simplicity of setup as well. The units now, they have a full integrated wizard. So for anybody that's using this for the first time, you can use the IPCS7 with its control wizard, and it will allow you to set up all of your transmitters, receivers, the whole system through a really simplistic wizard. Where might it be used? So basically AV over IP, we're finding it used in things like signage, retail outlets using multiple screens. You can use it in a traditional matrix fashion. You can use it for things like video walls as well, which we'll get into later. But again, the flexibility is incredibly strong. And all of this is designed to be using standard routable Ethernet packets through, as I say, traditional 1 gig network switches. Let's look at it in a simple matrix application. So of course, as with any matrix, multiple transmitters being sent to multiple receivers with that flexibility. You'd then be using our IPCS7 drag and drop interface for simple control. And then it's simple to increase the system size if required, as we've discussed. So essentially, you've got a 1 gig network switch. These should be either managed, a layer 3 switch or a managed layer 2 switch. So as I say, it should be either a layer 3 switch or a managed layer 2 switch. Your transmitters would obviously then fit into the system, as you see here on screen. That would be your sources. Those would be connected into the network switch. Set up your IP7000 receivers, the RX receivers, with your various screens, projectors. You can even use that for audio if you want as well, just for audio. And then you'd have the IPCS7 controller, again connected into your network switch. And in this scenario, we're showing that with a touchscreen display. Thanks to the USB capabilities of the IP system, you can then use this to use it in conjunction with a touchscreen device. You might then want a distribution application. So you don't need the control element. You don't need to run it with a separate network switch. You can just run one transmitter to many receivers. And that's done thanks to the fact that our transmitter, the TX model, sends the signal out to the RX in a traditional fashion. But then the receiver has these additional LAN connections. So one input coming in from your transmitter, and then you've got 2 outputs on this unit, which can then be fed onto additional IP7000 RXs. So of course, it's going to be just the same signal sent to every receiver, But in a scenario like maybe you think of an airport where they're running the same information on multiple screens, this is an easy way to do it, just distributing that signal from point to point. We'll get into codecs a bit later, but as you'll see on here, you have a range of low bandwidth and high bandwidth products, models with high latency or low latency, and also then models with more noise, basically, so lower quality picture. And we'll cover these as we go through the presentation today. Let's have a look at a case study from a popular sports bar in London called the Moortown Bell. We've got a few images of it here, so you'll see all around this property. You can see at least there are 4 screens in the background with a video wall in front of you. And then from this image as well, you can see a whole selection of products around the bar, around the various seating areas. Again, it includes video walls, LED walls. So there's a lot of devices in this property. Looking at a bit of a diagram of this system. Again, as we saw earlier, it's basically IP7 transmitters, IP7000TX on the left-hand side. In this case, they're being used with sports channels from a popular satellite service. Those are then going into the 1 gig network switch. You've also then got your CS7 controller plugged into the network switch. And then from your network switch, of course, you're going to all of your endpoints, your IP7000 receivers, IP7000RX. This is a bit of a top-down view. This is only an illustration. It's not accurate in terms of scale, but it gives you an idea. So again, you've got your sports bar. All of the orange boxes on screens there, on screen, would be screens, TVs with as an endpoint. You've then got the main entrance here, which is where the CS7 controller is located, along with a touchscreen display. So effectively in this scenario, when you walk into this bar, into this sports bar, you're greeted by the staff, you pick a table or you're given a table, and then you've got access from the staff. They can give you access to certain sports channels if that's available in your local seating area. All done again using the CYP IPCS7 controller. How's it working? So there's a very simple drag and drop interface. So we'll cover this a bit more in detail shortly, but the left-hand side here is the transmitters. Any transmitter in the system can be displayed on this left-hand side. The right-hand side is then a zone preview, so it's showing you what could be available in a certain zone. So basically the right-hand side here is showing you individual screens or video walls or groups of screens. They can all just be listed here, and you can prioritize the order that they're displayed as well. So you might actually have a video wall that you want to be the very first item on this right-hand side. You can order these screens to be wherever you need them to be. And this system is then using an incredibly simple drag and drop. Just drag from your transmitter. These all have a live preview, by the way. So when you actually have this system running, the little thumbnails here are constantly updating every second or 2 seconds. So you can always get a vague idea of what's on that source. And it's the same with the screens as well. So you'll be able to see sort of, it's only a preview, it's just like a Jpeg preview, but you can then see what's on your source and what's on your screen. And again, then just drag and drop the content from one to the other. This is then back in that sports bar. This is part of that case study again. So on the left-hand side there, you see they've got a single screen there with a speaker above it, which is displaying at the moment, as you see there, racing, motor racing. Below that is then the touchscreen display, which is running our CS7 control software. And that's then what you're seeing on the right-hand side there. So again, on the screen, you've then got the monitor and control section, which you can see highlighted here. And that's where you've then got all of your transmitters and all of your receivers, and the members of staff here in this sports bar would simply drag and drop the content across. Notice here, by the way, on screen, you've actually got the installer's logo. So the installer that installed this system up in London has put their logo into the CS7 controller. This is something we'll cover shortly in the presentation, but that's just something to remember. You can put logos into this control interface to highlight either your installation company or the venue, the location where this is being displayed. Moving on, just under that touchscreen display is one of the CYP wall plates. This is a transmitter wall plate. This is actually HD-based T, so it's been integrated into this IP system. But this is giving flexibility. If somebody comes in like a mobile DJ or somebody's doing a presentation in this environment, you could plug in an additional source like a laptop into one of these transmitter wall plates, and then obviously view that throughout the property on the corresponding receivers. But we are actually launching later this year, we will be launching an IP transmitter wall plate. So you then wouldn't have to mess about with HD base T. You could just run it as a standard transmitter, just in a wall plate version. Now on the right hand side of the screen here, you can then see a video wall, 2x2 video wall, and we'll cover that now a little bit more. Sorry, that's just the wall plate there as well. So this is how you would configure a video wall using our IP-CS7 and the IP7000 TX and RX. So simple video wall configuration, one IP7000 receiver per screen, and you would save this as a video wall group. You can name it whatever you like, but once you've configured a video wall, you save it as a video wall, and it will then be displayed on your interface. So on the right hand side here, for example, if you had saved this as video wall, you would now have a group on the right hand side here called video wall. And when you drag and drop your content from source to video wall, all four of the screens would then populate into that 2x2 video wall. And again, as I've said earlier, you've got one IP7000 RX per screen. And just through the simple web GUI configuration, you would say that this RX here is part of this video wall, top left-hand screen. This one is top right-hand screen, bottom left, bottom right, etc., etc. So once that's configured, it then just pops up as a video wall here. Now, of course, because of the flexibility, you could, if you want, have 4 separate images running on these screens, or you could have it as one video wall, or you could have a combination, you can mix. But that is something that's so flexible with this system. A new feature for this year is the login, administrator and separate user logins. So if you look on screen here, you'll see that we've got 5 separate zones. Zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, if you imagine these are meeting rooms, you're in meeting room 1 and you've got a local display. Say, for example, it's a projector. Now, if this system is all run by the same hardware, the same controller, same TXs, same RXs, all on the same network switch, you would need to limit what can be controlled from each zone. Obviously, if you're in zone 1, you don't want somebody from zone 3 putting their content onto your screen or turning off your screen or something like that. So what we've done now is we've added user logins to the IP-CS7 controller. So here's an example. Example 1. You would set a login as zone 1, so you get a username and password, say zone 1, and password is zone 1. And the administrator has already said, in that zone, you only have access to transmitter 1 and receiver 1. So again, you walk into this room here, and you're using the local controller in that room, and it would be logged in as zone 1. So you've only then got access to the receiver 1 and to, maybe in this case, transmitter 1. As an administrator, which is example 2, you would have access to every single transmitter, every single receiver, and all of the settings. But as that administrator, you can go in and set up, again, say zone 2. You might just have a username and password, zone 2, and the administrator has said you only have access to receiver 2, which is your local screen in that room, and you have access to transmitters 2 and 3, for example. Now, what they can also do is they can say whether you do or do not have access to the settings. So again, you can have that set up. You walk into zone 2, and for most examples like this, you would never want the end user to have access to any settings in case they accidentally go in and mess up the settings. So again, you can lock that so they don't have access to it. The way this would actually come up is that in each zone, for example, you could have something as simple as a little PoE touchscreen in that local zone, and you could have these just using a web browser. You could have them logged in to each of those individual zones. So whenever you power up zone 2, for example, there'll be a little touchscreen in there, and the touchscreen would automatically look for the web GUI of the CS7 controller, and it could, if you set it up this way, it can automatically log in as zone 2, which means that when you look at the display on zone 2, you can only see the local receiver and you can only see the transmitters you're given access to. So it's incredibly simple to use and incredibly easy to set up. Let's have a look a bit more at the GUI. So this is the IPCS7 controller. This is how it looks when it comes up on your laptop, on a mobile device, or on a touchscreen display. So straight away, bottom right-hand side there, you'll see that is actually the main settings. That's the hidden settings. So when you click on that there, it can be controlled by username and password, but this is basically moving it to somewhere a little bit more discreet. On our old version of the controller, it used to be along the top here, and of course that's more likely that end users would try and click on that. Monitor and control is the feature we've been looking at all the way through. So with your source preview, transmitters basically, and your zone preview, which would be individual screens, groups of screens, or video walls. Preset recall, that's basically where you would recall presets that you've previously configured. So say, for example, we go back to that example of a sports bar. They actually have some presets in there where you can walk in the morning and press preset 1, and preset 1 has been configured to simply send all of the 8 transmitters to various screens across the property. So it's sort of almost like a mix of screens with a mix of transmitters. But you can have a preset where it just says, right, I want transmitter 1 to be sent to all receivers, and that could be a preset. So you can then have these presets. You just build them through the GUI. It's really, really simple to build, and then you can recall them simply with this preset recall. Settings is what it sounds like. We'll cover that a bit more shortly, but settings allows you access to go in and things like configuring presets or video walls, things like that. Devices, we'll now look at these a little bit more in detail. So devices here, you can see on the left hand side you've got transmitter, and then on the right hand side you've got receiver. Now each of these has a little hello feature next to it. So if you imagine all of your transmitters are lined up in a rack and they all look exactly the same, and you've got 10 transmitters. You want to try and find out which one of those is connected to a certain source. All you do is you go into the GUI here and you click the hello feature, and on the physical transmitters themselves an orange light will start flashing. So straight away you can tell, that one there is the transmitter I need to adjust, or whatever you need to do with it. That's exactly the same for receivers. It's less likely you'll need that because they'll be behind a screen. Obviously they won't be in a rack, but that feature is available as well. On the right hand side you can basically see 6 little drop down boxes. When you actually look, you've got video, audio, USB, IR, and serial. This is effectively 5 streams that your transmitter is always sending out. So at any point you've got video, audio, USB, infrared, and serial. So all of these are being transmitted. Now the nice thing is that with these drop down boxes you get a bit of flexibility. So you could say, for example, right, my receiver here, this is an LG TV, I want to be receiving the audio from, for example, the pattern generator, but I actually want the video, USB, IR, and serial from the laptop. That's what you can do in here. You can go in and say, I want the video from transmitter 1, for example, I want the audio from transmitter 2, and I want the serial to be coming from transmitter 3. Those are just pure examples, but really simple to configure where you want those streams going or coming from. When you actually click, you've got on the right hand side here the I button for information. The nice thing now with our latest controller firmware is that you can access all of the transmitter and all of the receiver information from the controller. With the previous generation, if you wanted to log into a receiver, for example, to change the scaling output, you had to log into the individual IP address of that receiver. Now all of that, you just click on the I for information button here, and you'll then be given a screen like this. So this is then showing you the detail settings of a receiver. So things like system here, that will tell you the name of that unit, gives you the option to reboot or factory default. It also tells you the firmware version in case you need to speak to our engineers at any point. IP address, auto IP is the best way to keep them, to be honest with you. All the systems that our technicians have set up, they always leave it on auto IP, and that's the most simple way to configure the system. You can set this to static, but it's not really worth it. Video over IP, you then got options here for channel number. Each individual, this is basically telling you which transmitter it's trying to talk to. So at the moment, this one is looking at transmitter 1, which is channel 1. You have to have, every transmitter has to have its own channel number, which makes logical sense, as you would with any other system like a satellite box or something similar. Casting mode, multicast is what you need for matrix functionality. Unicast can be used for distribution. Scalar output, we'll actually cover that as well. Let's have a bit of a look at that. So the scalar output, every single IP7000 RX receiver has a built-in scalar. So if you need to configure a system with a mix of 4K screens and 1080p screens, for example, you can set the scalar. And you'll see here there are a whole host of options. Even here you can see right the way down to 480i and right the way up to 4K support. So again, that gives you flexibility in terms of what screens you're running within one larger system. Free routing, I will jump down to here as well. We'll go back to a couple of parts in a minute, but free routing is what I discussed a moment ago with the 5 individual streams. So you're having video, audio, USB, IR, and serial. If you want to have that flexibility where you can say, I want the audio from this TX, but the video from this TX, you would have this enabled. If for some reason you want to lock a transmitter to a receiver, what you would do is you would go in here and disable the relevant stream. So a useful example here is that say that transmitter 1 is connected to a projector on receiver 5, and you want a serial connection to always go from transmitter 1 to receiver 5. What you would do is you would basically say on our drag and drop system, you would say, right, transmitter 1, well, I want that communicating with receiver 5. You would then bring up this web GUI and you would then tick the button for enable serial, which means you're unticking. You're going to untick the enable serial. What that then means is that whenever you drag and drop transmitter 1 to anywhere else, any other receiver, the serial connection will not be changed. So that serial connection will constantly be between transmitter 1 and receiver 5, because that's what you told it you needed, so you can send a constant RS-232 command to your projector. So that's very, very simple. You just go in here and you untick that. It's the same with any other routing here. So if you wanted to fix audio from a certain transmitter to a certain receiver, again, you could say, right, receiver 1, I want your signal coming from transmitter 7, and then you go in and you disable this audio routing, and that means that the audio is always fixed between that transmitter and receiver. It's a bit of a complicated one to explain on a video, but obviously if you're ever installing this, just contact us and we'll happily run through it with you. Going back to a couple of other key features here as well, you then have things like copying EDID, so you can basically do a lot of EDID settings. You've also then got here as well the lock feature, video select lock for device buttons. So if you want your receiver to be locked so that the end user can't press all the buttons on the unit, you can go in and disable any of the physical buttons on the unit. Serial over IP, that's quite straightforward there. USB, again, we've discussed you can use for KVM or touchscreens, and then there are some basic video wall settings here as well. That will just tell you if a receiver is configured as part of a video wall. Let's go in. This is then a transmitter being displayed on screen. So again, transmitter's on the left there, and this is the information seen. There's no scalar on the transmitter, so there's less functions here, and that routing we just spoken about is not here. That's all done in the receiver. So the transmitter is much more straightforward. Again, just tells you what it's called, auto IP, channel number. This would normally be set to 1 or higher. Whenever you install a brand new transmitter into our system, it will default to channel 0. So what we would recommend is always start your transmitters from channel 1 upwards, so that if you ever have to add an additional one, channel 0 is always available. Within there as well, you do actually have a couple of things as well. If your system is getting limited on bandwidth, say you've got a whole host of 4K sources going through it, and you're getting a bit close to what your network switch can handle, for each transmitter, you can go in and either adjust the bit rate or you can adjust the frame rate. So say, for example, you were running a restaurant and you've got menus on screen with very little movement, you could go in and reduce their frame rate to a lower frame rate, and of course that will then free up some bandwidth. So again, there's simple management in this system to help you with bandwidth if you need it. Then we've got the main sort of settings. This is the one that's hidden under the cog here. This is the sort of main system settings. So settings download, if you've just done an installation for a meeting room, and you want to save that configuration for a future system, you can do that. You can save the way you've configured it. When you build a similar system in the future, you can upload that configuration again. So say you're always installing meeting rooms with 3 transmitters, 4 receivers, and the same control system, being ours, for example, then you can just copy and paste effectively that setting. Looking further into it, you've then got LAN 1 and LAN 2. Let's have a bit of a look at that. So our IPCS7 controller has 2 independent LANs. LAN 1 is the dedicated IP system. That's basically the one that you'll be running all of our hardware with, our transmitters, our receivers, the controller, and that's going to be basically the one that's used as the AV network switch. And then LAN 2 can be used to connect into the existing network in that property. So obviously the one that has access to the outside world, maybe has their own data on it, has access to the internet. So you've got 2 totally independent LANs, making it a lot easier to manage the whole system. A few other bits in here, you've got the simple log out, so you can log out of the controller, change password, factory default, reboot, restart screen. That's used if you're using a touchscreen interface for your control system. If it freezes, for example, this would essentially just reboot the browser. Setup wizard, which as I described earlier, allows you to configure a system really simply. It guides you through it. User, this is where you click on this and you can log in and then set up those user logins. So again, you can go in here and say that room 1 only has access to XYZ when you log in as that username and password. Download log file, that would be used if you're speaking to our engineers and you're having some sort of on-site problem. You can then download the log file, share it with us, and we can then look at what the system's doing. And then lastly here, you've got the firmware. So if you need to do a firmware update, you can either upgrade all, which is a feature we've designed recently, so you can update all units at the same time, or if you need to, for some reason, you can update individual units using the advanced section there. Something I touched on earlier in the presentation was uploading your own logo to the control software. So top left-hand side here, you'll see you've got the CYP logo, but if you upload a logo here, then that can be displayed just here next to the CYP logo. So like I showed at the beginning of the presentation, the installer's logo was actually on screen here. That's the sort of thing you can do. You can upload a logo to have either the installer's logo or the company that it's going into. Again, say it's Joe Blogg's meeting rooms, you can have Joe Blogg's meeting rooms located on screen here. This is a bit of a look at the physical hardware. So this is actually, again, that same installation in that London sports bar. And you'll see it's all enclosed in a rack, which is actually a CYP RACS 600. So the units on the right here are the IP7000 transmitters. Those are our CYP transmitters. The units on the left here are, again, CYP, but just in a smaller size. These units that you see, the transmitters, fit straight in. They just slot in vertically to our RACS 600 system. If you're using smaller products or third-party products, you can then buy the RACS blanking tray, which is basically a slide-in metal tray that you can attach your additional equipment to. As well as that, this unit, you've got the option for the RACS Power Manager, which is basically, as you see on the right there, a power supply unit with things like timers built in. You can do event timing. It has various control management systems for the power. This can be used in either 12 volt, 48 volt, or also there's a 5 volt version as well. You've also then got the RACS fan available. If the system is in a non-air conditioned enclosure, you can then have the RACS fans as well for a bit more air movement. Let's look a little bit more now at the actual hardware itself. So we're looking at the codecs that are available through this 1 gig system. So effectively, this system we're talking about now sits almost right in the middle. You've got lower quality systems like H.265 and H.264, which use more compression. So of course they're lower bandwidth, which is helpful in an environment with a bandwidth issue, but the overall image quality isn't as good. Motion Jpeg is what we're using for this system we're talking about today, the IP7000 system, and it sits roughly in the middle of this sort of bandwidth chart. At the very high end there, you've then got SDVoE, which then has a much higher bandwidth, so can pass a higher bandwidth signal, of course. In terms of latency, you've then got, again, the 1 gig system sits here with the Motion Jpeg between sort of 16 milliseconds to 33, depending on the settings of the unit. You've got then the quickest we do is then the SDVOE products, which have very low latency. And then again, as you go here to H.264, H.265, those then have, again, more latency, which is another limitation of those systems. And then you've got the picture signal to noise ratio. Again, the 1 gig system sits right in the middle. Top end is then SDVOE with the highest image quality. And then again, formats at the bottom, depending on what the application is. IP7000TX is the transmitter seen on the left here. These have HDMI input and VGA input, and also then a separate analog input for audio. The receiver there, you can then see, has the USB ports on that, which again is designed for either KVM support or touchscreens, and this then has the HDMI output. If you connect VGA in on the transmitter, the receiver will output that as HDMI. It will basically convert and output that through the HDMI. The IPCS7 controller here, as you can see, it's got HDMI output, which is a 1080p output because it's only used for control. It then has the USB output again, as I've said, for using with a touchscreen display. And also, if you want really simple control using our presets feature that we discussed earlier, you could just simply plug in our CRTG1 trigger pad. The back of the CS7 controller has the connection for this trigger pad, and the trigger pad could then be used for accessing those really simple presets. So rather than having to actually use a touchscreen or some sort of GUI-driven device, you could just physically press a button on here, and it would bring up up to eight of the presets you've configured. Soon to be released, later this year, we believe, will be the new IP7000 Txw P, which is a wall plate, as you can see. So again, same functionality, HDMI and VGA input, RS-232 connection, and then you've got the USB as well. And this is going to be, as I say, available later this year, and we'll just configure into the system as would any other standard transmitter. More of these videos. I hope this has been useful today, but there are some more videos on our CYP YouTube channel. And of course, any other questions, do feel free to contact us directly. Looking a bit here at a comparison, Gen 1, as we're calling it here, is the Motion Jpeg IP system we've spoken about today versus the SDVOE system. So again, the key things there really, 1 gig system versus 10 gig. And you will see here that the latency, of course, is less on SDVOE, so it's a faster system in terms of latency. And you can, for example, pass things like 4K HDR through the SDVOE system, whereas the Motion Jpeg system that we've spoken about today would be a 3G solution, so up to 4K 60 420. But there we go. Thank you very much. I really hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. If you do have any questions, you can see my details on screen there, or contact us via www.cypeurope.com. And do watch out for future videos as well on HD-based products, SDVOE products, and more to come in the future. Also, don't miss out on our live webinars. Just keep an eye on our website for update. Again, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that's been useful, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.